Hello, welcome to the Dol-Fan UK podcast. We have had a short break over the last few weeks. Much has happened. We've had the draft, so we'll talk about that. But as always, joined by Lee. How are you doing, sir?
Doing very well. Enjoying the sun in Portugal at the moment. So coming to you from a different location.
And we're also joined this week by a special guest. I say special. He's a Dolphins fan. Some of you may have seen him on the Channel 5 documentary that came out a few months ago. Plus, he's recently featured as why he was a Dolphins fan on the Miami Dolphins UK social media channels. Welcome, Ian.
Hello, how are you?
Very well, thanks. Thanks for joining us this one.
Absolute pleasure. I love talking about the Dolphins. We need to do it some more.
Right. Just before we kick off in terms of the NFL stuff, I do want to mention the Miami Grand Prix, which has been happening over the weekend, just gone. Tremendous spectacle as always. I watched the race and it was one of the best, my favourite Grand Prix of the year, actually, because it's around Hard Rock Stadium. Marketer's dream, I think, in terms of if you're new to the NFL and you don't follow any specific team, but you're into your F1, because the Dolphins were heavily splashed all over the weekend. I thought, did you guys manage to catch it?
I did. I went out especially last night to watch it. So yeah, definitely got my fix in. Thought it was it was cool that they had the podium sitters with Dolphins jerseys ready when they got to their cool down room and stuff like that. So yeah, let's say there's a good mix, and also it's great to see the Dolphins players out there having a good time off the field, just having fun. Like there's not many teams that get to do stuff like this where they're hosting other events, whereas Miami are doing that.
Yeah, no, I managed to catch a little bit of it. I didn't manage to watch it all, but I felt quite all left F1 out at the moment because I've got a soft spot for Azerbaijan and I've got a soft spot for Miami, and obviously that's in the last 2 weeks. So I've had to try and keep up with everything. But I have to say, I thought when I was lucky enough when I went over to Miami a little while ago, they showed me what would be the route, and I thought, oh, this is going to be. This is going to be all right, sort of thing. It's not going to be brilliant, but I have to say, from some of the aerial footage that we've seen over the last few weeks on social media and across the race, I thought it looked brilliant. I must say, as not an F1 fan, I thought it looked superb, and the way the Dolphins were integrated into everything was brilliant. I loved watching it again as a non F1 fan, but definitely tried to watch a little bit more than I ever would before, which is fantastic for anyone around the league.
Yeah, funny
I think
story.
If anyone's ever been out to Hard Rock Stadium and seen the stadium and the area, you need to watch the Grand Prix, even if it's only the opening 10-15 minutes, just to see what an immense amount of work goes into turning what is a football stadium and car park into a full Grand Prix track. It really is something quite special.
Yeah, funny story. Before we move on to the NFL stuff, Lee and I were over there last year, Andy and Ian, and brought my family over for the Steelers game, and my son walked on the track and he picked up a couple of stones from the track and wanted to take some of the track home with him. So he picked up a couple of stones and put them in his pocket, only never to be seen again. So he tried to come home with a little souvenir of the F1 track, but unfortunately lost these stones.
Oh, I like that.
Anyway, moving on, NFL stuff. So the draft is now in the rear window, and we're going to talk about the Dolphins picks in a little bit more detail. But before we do that, guys, any general thoughts on the 2023 draft, both from an overall perspective and from a Dolphins perspective? We'll start with you, Ian. Any initial thoughts?
There's normally a bit of drama surrounding the draft, and I have to say, obviously, the trading up to the first overall pick was a big thing, but largely I thought on draft night there wasn't a lot that really happened. And the really weird thing for me is that I saw a video after the draft where it basically said that everyone won, and I looked at it and I was like, I don't think everyone won, but I largely see that again, teams had needs and they largely filled them. And that was, we had a very talented draft class this year. It was very deep. There wasn't maybe a lot of special in there, but there was some good players. And I think that everyone just kind of got what they needed, other than maybe us a little bit. But that's because we had 4 picks, so we weren't expecting to get everything we potentially wanted. But I felt like there was a little bit more oomph in maybe previous years, shall we say, around the draft. I didn't necessarily see it happening this year, but still was decent draft. Decent, not brilliant.
Lee, what were your thoughts around the because you tend to stay up and watch these things live, don't you?
I lost you.
Lee?
I didn't hear the question. You cut out. Sorry, my bad.
Yeah, we were just talking about the 23 draft overall. You tend to stay awake for those sorts of things, don't you, year on year? Just wondered if you stayed awake this year.
Yeah, I made the same mistake that I've made every single year since I've become an NFL fan. Like since I became a serious NFL fan, where I stay up and watch all of the first round, regardless of whether the Dolphins have a pick. Fall asleep somewhere early in the second round and wake up, hopefully just in time for the third round. And the same thing happened, but I was lucky enough to wake up just 2 picks before our first pick. So got to see all the Dolphins pick, even if there was only 4 of them. But yeah, I did stay up. Can't help myself. This time of the year, I need that football fix.
Nice little segue then into those Dolphins picks, Lee. So we only had 4, as you say. Needs going into the draft arguably were centered around the offensive line, potentially running back and tight end, as well as 3 positional groups where you'd have thought the Dolphins would have looked to address. They didn't do that in the offensive line and instead focused on other positions. Before we do a deep dive in each of the picks, Ian, what did you think around the Dolphins' neglect to address the offensive line in the draft? They weren't as focused on that as some of the media were. For example, I know Barry Jackson wrote an article recently in the Miami Herald where he suggested the Dolphins have not fared well at drafting offensive linemen in the second or third round, therefore was a fan of not doing so again this year. But where do you stand on that? Because they didn't address it. So it looks as though it's still in a sort of same position strength-wise as last year. Where do you stand on that now?
I mean, obviously we did get an offensive lineman in the 6th or 7th, whatever, 7th, wasn't it, the last round? Apparently he has a chance to start, which I can't see happening instantly, I have to be honest. But for me, I think the big problem with it is when we have Austin Jackson, that was a first round draft pick, and it hasn't really worked out. Now I understand the logic in maybe wanting to try and give him that extra year support. I thought he was maybe better this year, but that was largely because, again, there are still better players we've added to our offensive line in Teron Armstead and others as well. But I think it was such a glaring need that even realistically, so correct me if I'm wrong, Austin Jackson is in the last year of his contract now, isn't he? I mean, realistically, had we have gone and invested a second or a third round pick in that offensive line, had Austin Jackson not done enough this year potentially to warrant an extension or warrant a new deal or anything, then you would have had at least that second or third round option to maybe he's a depth player. Maybe it's someone that is, going to help out with a bit of security. But I just would have liked to seen that we realized that this was a potential problem for us. Not only Austin Jackson, but anywhere across the offensive line. We know that there's a potential issue here. We know we want to fix it. So let's try and do that. And I think that the neglect was, it was annoying. I understand it as well, but it is still annoying. I've seen that there's free agents that are potentially available. Apparently, we've had visits from other people as well. But I still think I would have drafted one higher than in the 7th round, to be honest with you. We'll go on to the tight end, wide receiver potential position later on, I assume, but potentially the tight end that can block. Okay, cool. Still not an offensive lineman. And I think that, again, we don't know what Mike McDaniel wants. We don't know what the organization wants, but maybe as an outsider, I think the one glaring obvious need when the Bengals went to the Super Bowl and lost was they had a very poor offensive line. They came back the following year and they had improved their offensive line. And funny enough, they were still really good again. So I think that maybe would have been the way that I'd have gone, which is there was a clear and obvious need that everyone around the league knows was a problem for the Miami Dolphins. Let's put a bit more time and effort into that. And funnily enough, we might see everyone going, oh my God, the Dolphins are a bit serious. I just thought it was a very obvious miss.
I'll hand over to you in a second, Lee. Just want to clarify. Obviously, we drafted Ryan Hayes in the 7th, like you mentioned, Ian. What I said was in terms of not drafting an offensive lineman, I meant with one of those early picks.
Yeah, completely.
In the Premier round. So that's should just clarify that. Gone then, Lee.
Oh, I thought Ian, you touched on something really important there right at the end of your comments about everyone in the league kind of having the same idea, and it being kind of fairly obvious, like this is a position you could do with upgrading, and that really goes for, I'm going to say, anyone outside of Connor Williams and Teron Armstead. and
Yep.
you know, anyone could be upgraded. That's, you know, not a slight against anyone, but I think that also makes it exceptionally difficult, because now if you want to move, the price has gone up because we know you're desperate. You've only got 4 picks, and we know we can fleece you because you need to go and get what you want. And I think actually, yeah, as much as I'd love to have seen the O line, I mean, I would have been a proponent of spending all 4 picks on O lineman, like and drafting O lineman until you get it right. But I think you avoided the position of saying, "Oh no, we really need an O lineman. This is the only one that's left, and we're overdrafting him or drafting a player you don't like." And I think I'm kind of glad they avoided that situation, but it does mean it does still need addressing. There are still ways to do that, but
Yeah.
I think, like you say, I think what you said is exactly right. I think it kind of pigeonholes you into this position where you make a decision. Do we go with the best player we feel that is available, or do we go with our biggest position of need, which means we might be taking a lower player on our board? And I think that's the kind of conundrum they found themselves in, and they went, you know, best player available. I also think, you know, what we saw with taking a corner is you've got you can't look at the roster and you can't look at the way Chris Greer builds a team and say, we don't need this or we don't need that, because they went after Jalen Ramsey, they went after JC Jackson last year, and then they drafted a corner in the first round this year. The corner has never been off the table at any point in the last 3 years, even before Byron was hurt and had some issues with X on the team, and with a great young backfield, you know. So they were always looking at that defensive backfield. So yeah, I think that's what makes it really difficult when you head into a draft with someone like Chris Greer. I think he's looking for value over what is obvious. Whether that pans out is obviously a whole different thing. But I think I can appreciate why he's gone that way.
And of course, we are talking about Cam Smith, who was drafted in the second round, pick number 51 overall, out of South Carolina. What do you guys make of him? Have you seen much on tape? I mean, personally, I haven't, but he does seem to have come with a decent reputation. And like Lee, I agree to a certain extent that you can't have too many corners in this league, particularly in a stacked AFC where the quarterback class is pretty good. And you've obviously got the likes of Josh Allen and Aaron Rodgers in the AFC East. So put that together with the fact that Jalen Ramsey and Xavier Howard are either approaching or the wrong side of 30, and they're not going to play at their high level for too much longer, you would have thought, given the Dolphins appear to be in win now mode with those two guys as your starting corners. So what did you make, for Ian, from your perspective with regards to the selection of Cam Smith at cornerback?
I think, you know, the main thing for me, there was two really glaring needs, and I looked at it and I thought, well, for me, it's tight end and it's offensive line. And when I didn't see either one of those two, I didn't start up to watch the draft. When I didn't see either of those two, I was like, oh, what, you know, like, what's the logic in this? And then again, you start to think about it that little bit deeper, with X being the wrong side of 30, and Jalen Ramsey coming up to it as well, whichever way around it is. I never remember off the top of my head. But I just get to that point where I look at it, the more I look at it and think, this is a really good pick. Not again because he's going to be the person that's going to take us to the Super Bowl, and oh my God, we're going to be fantastic. But you look at someone like Javon Holland last year, who was a second round pick, fantastic player, started straight into that gap when we needed him. And I thought for large chunks of last season was one of our best players, and really kept the defense intact, I thought, for a large chunks of large amounts of the games. But I look at Cam Smith now coming into this with X, who has been injured previously. We all know his injury history. You know, Jalen Ramsey is brilliant, but we don't really know what we're going to get out of him. You know, he's a fantastic name to have, but could we expect to see that little bit more? I don't know. Are we going to see a lesser sort of product? Again, we hope not, but it's, you know, you have to be realistic in these scenarios. And I see a second round pick in Cam Smith and just think, if he can slot in the way that Javon Holland did, it could mean that this really good defense that we have on paper stays good throughout the whole of the season. Because again, we've had it in the last 2 years where we've got a massive winning runs and then massive losing runs. And large chunks of that losing run comes from our defense not being able to stop what's going on. You know, before we know it, we're already so many points behind. And I think that, again, maybe he doesn't start instantly. I know a fair few people saying he has got a chance to start relatively quickly, but I think if you need to slot him in, if you need to cover somebody one-on-one, he's a good athlete. He's almost a freak of an athlete, 6 foot, but I just see it working. I do. I just think there's a logic in it. I think it's a smart move. Maybe it's a little bit higher than we'd have liked to have taken the corner. But again, when that sort of player falls to you, you're mad to not pick him up.
I mean, in Smith, to me, he appears better suited to his zone coverage and off man. But if he can trust his technique and learn and develop his technique, he could easily develop into a CB2 quite quickly. What are your thoughts there, Lee, on Smith?
Yeah, I think he does a lot of things really well. A lot of things that we need in this defense as well. One of the things that really stuck out to me, and this was simply, after the pick was made, going on and watching highlights, and I'm fully aware that highlights are very heavily weighted in his favour. I'm now going through the game film like in its entirety, but the first thing you notice is some of the open field tackles he makes are really brilliant, and for a defense that has at times struggled to make tackles in the open field, I think that will be a welcome change. I think we also have to bear in mind we're not exactly sure what Vic Fangio's going to put out there. He's said himself he's been sat away from the game for a year, coming up with new schemes and new plays. So it'd be interesting to see what he wants, what usage he's going to get out of having all these defensive backs. I also think there's you see it a little bit. It's a bit of a counterpunch to the AFC East teams, isn't it? You go get a quarterback, we'll get another corner. Do you know what I mean? It's you want Josh Allen, Stephon Diggs, we'll bring in Jalen Ramsey. You want to bring in Aaron Rodgers, we're going to get another corner. We're going to load up on the back end of the defense because we trust the offense. We trust Mike McDaniel. We brought back all the running backs. We feel that if the defense steps up and, to the level we want it to be, just based on the way the offense played last year, and I assume that will get better, that this team's going to be a different level.
The next pick was obviously in round 3, pick 84 overall, and they selected Devon A-Chain out of Texas A&M. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I love this pick as a player. I think whilst he's undersized, and that could be a concern in NFL circles, and you have to question whether he's going to be an every down back. I don't think he needs to be an every down back in this offense with the running class and running back core that they've got. But his vision, and he's got that vision and that rare acceleration that you need in a Mike McDaniel offense. And I think so. I love this pick. And of course, all the reviews are saying that how quick he is, and he's probably one of the quickest running backs in the draft. What were your thoughts on when that pick was made? You saw how happy Mike McDaniel was with that pick. Are you guys just as happy too?
I mean, I love it.
Yeah,
I love it. I think it's fantastic. This for me is my favorite pick in the whole draft. I liked the Dalvin Cook rumor when it came out. I understood the logic in it, but I'm not one of these people that is massively over the top with paying an excessive amount of money for a running back. Granted, he is a very good running back at that. But when you get a guy that has got the speed that A-Chain has, a little bit of insight as well, is he currently, when he was doing the test, well, currently as of right now, and also when he was doing the testing, when he was weighed, he's doing track and field. So he's doing track and field. So he's tried to slim down to below 200. So he's in prime athletic build for his track and field events that he's got coming up. But realistically, when he comes into the NFL, like what Raheem Mostert did, is he'll be putting that weight back on. So he is probably a little bit undersized, but I think he's going to have a great bit of pop to him as well. And I think, realistically, I actually really like, I have to say, Raheem Mostert is a fantastic RB1, I would say, but I really like Jeff Wilson Jr. I really do. I think maybe Salvin Ahmed, Miles Gaskin, yeah, okay, they're all right, sort of thing. But we really needed that third punch. If you can deal with Jeff Wilson Jr., if you can deal with Raheem Mostert, that's fine. But even if A-Chain comes in and he's a 2 down back, or if he just does 1, anytime he touches the ball, I saw this quote, anytime he touches the ball, expect to see him go to the house. Like, anything could happen with him. Now, I'm not going to say every time he touches the ball, he's going to score. I'm not going to say he's going to be an absolutely generational player for the Dolphins and we're going to be brilliant and we're going to win the Super Bowl and this is everything going to be fantastic. But it's another element for defenses to think about. And just as we said with the AFC, so much influence at the moment on having very, very good offenses. The quarterbacks around the league are phenomenal. The amount of capital that was invested by the Jets in Aaron Rodgers. There's clearly an investment on being a offense-ready team. But it doesn't necessarily mean that all these defenses in the leagues are ready to deal with Waddle, Hill, not Cam Smith, Elijah Higgins, deal with Chosen Anderson. Is he going by now?
He is.
That was a new one, but
the chosen one.
Yeah. A Chelsea fan, a special one. I'd say if he comes up and if he catches one touchdown for us, I'll be surprised. But if you get another element of a running back constantly, any running back that we have could go from 0 to 60 in what feels like no time at all. Just good luck dealing with it. Just good luck to whatever team around the league is dealing with it. And it also, the big thing for me, takes a lot of pressure off Tua. If he can run and Tua has someone who he can rely on and hand the ball off to and constantly make something happen, or there's always the threat that something could happen, Tua doesn't have to throw the ball as much, which means that the offensive line might not be tested as much. It means that we could potentially go round the offensive line if this guy is that quick. I just think that there's so many possibilities to it. I think it's the best pick we've made for quite a while, I have to be honest. And I think we've made some good picks in years gone by.
Yeah, picking 109 in a rookie fantasy draft over the weekend. He fell to me in that ninth slot, and I gobbled him up because I thought, can't afford not to at with that value. Lee, is he going to be in your fantasy team this year?
I mean, for his sake, I hope not, because that's the kiss of death to any player. But yeah, I mean, you just imagine Mike McDaniel's having an absolute field day trying to find ways to get this guy the ball. With that speed, and I think he probably likes the slightly smaller stature as well. I think it probably fits what he wants to do. A-Chain completely feels the running back by committee kind of back, doesn't he? Like, it doesn't have to be a 3-down back, doesn't have to do any one thing specifically. I think they're going to be super matchup specific. You might find weeks where they're quiet, and then you find a week where he's almost solely used. I think it's also worth noting, he's obviously put in some work on special teams as well at Texas A&M, and I know they expect Braxton Berrios to be returning kicks and stuff. I think it's just another option to stop you having to put Waddle or Hill back there at any point. As exciting as that would be, and if it really came to it, and you're in a playoff game and you need something, maybe you do that, but you don't have to do it on a week by week basis. You've got other options for people who are experienced back there, because it's all right saying, oh, we'll throw someone back there. Anyone can go back there and try and catch a ball. We were seeing that is not always a great option for getting decent field position. You need someone who's confident. So yeah, I think that having some special teams experience is definitely handy.
One last thing on A-Chain before we move on to the next pick. Don't know whether you guys saw the Athletics draft guide, but they likened him to a Javid Best type player who used to play for the Detroit Lions, I think. And whilst he didn't set the world alight, I like to think that they'd probably set their standards a little bit higher than Javid Best was as an NFL player.
I was convinced you were going to go J Train to A Train.
Yeah,
I was absolutely convinced that's where you were going.
Yeah, to be honest, you've said it now, Lee. So that is gonna be a new strap line, J Train to A Chain, and you can take all the credit for that, Lee. Moving on, then round 6, pick number 197 overall, saw the Dolphins select Elijah Higgins, marked as a wide receiver out of Stanford, but we know he's going to play as tight end. Don't know too much about him. Lee, you've been watching a bit of tape, I believe. What do you think? Is that a solid pick? We've already said that he's you got a smile on your face, Lee. We've already said he's going to potentially act as a blocking tight end as well. Solid pick, Lee.
Yeah, I think team know what they're doing. I think he was announced as a tight end, and that's an important definition. Is that that's what they announced him as, because I think that's where they solely envisage him playing. But again, it's a great mold to be in where you have that sort of versatility, because we know we want our tight ends to be more than just a blocker, and we know they need to be able to play a receiver, because we've seen tight ends. If you can just block, you're not going to get on the field often enough in important situations, and you can't be as telegraphed as Mike Gesicki was at times, where he's on the field, it means you're having to pass the ball because you know he can't block. So I think this is it's important to have a player who's a little bit more versatile than that. So yeah, excited to see what they can do with him.
I mean, does seem to be a versatile player. Reading the synopsis after the pick was made, they do say he's got average ball skills, but can run a more robust route tree than most tight ends. And he does have the framing technique to be that run blocker in space as well. I mean, you've already mentioned it, Ian, around potentially acting as an extra lineman when they're running the ball. But where do you think his main responsibilities are going to lie? Is it going to be as a blocking tight end, or has he got that potential to contribute to the passing game as well?
I see him being a short down guy. I see him being maybe a red zone guy. One of the things I will say about him is he can lack the ability to create separation a little bit, which is
We've
something
heard that one before.
yeah. It's one of those ones that I like the idea of it. I do also have my reservations. He's not particularly fast. He's a reasonable sized guy. I think he is going to be a good player for us, but I think I hope he's used as a blocking tight end, to be honest with you. But I think more realistically, we'll see him being a tight end in short down situations, and I think potentially expect to see him in the red zone as well. Maybe not scoring, but he'll be in there, because I think when you're 6'3" and have got a little bit about you, someone is always going to have to find a way to mark you to try and capitalize on that threat. So even if he takes away one defender from someone like Tyreek Hill, or from the chosen one, or from whatever it is, then that's all we need him to do. And fair play to him for doing that.
Okay, lastly then, round number 7, pick 238 overall, offensive tackle Ryan Hayes out of Michigan. We've already mentioned him at the top of the show, but round 7 picks generally do find it hard to make the team, given the level of talent on the offensive line. Ian, do you think he's got a shot at making the roster? I think you alluded to that earlier, but how realistically is that going to be?
I'm just looking here at what we've got in terms of depth, and I don't know he does. I think one of the big things is he lacks speed. He's a big guy. He's clearly a good player. The Michigan offensive line has been very good in the last couple of years, but this is the NFL. This is not Michigan, unfortunately. And I think that when you have players with such explosive speed off the edge, I don't think you can see him playing as a tackle, which means he then has to play as a guard. And I think we're all sort of the impression that, could we improve at guard? Yeah, we probably could. Is it that bad? Maybe not. Maybe there's a couple of rooms for improvement, but it's quite a solid group, I would say. So I don't know if he plays. He's massive. That's the thing. So he is going to be useful at times, I think. But if he didn't make the roster, it wouldn't surprise me. If he did make the roster, it wouldn't surprise me. But it's not the sort of addition in what has been a very deep draft in terms of players of quality. It wouldn't. I don't get wowed by this pick. Do you know what I mean? And I don't think even the Dolphins were wowed by this pick. I'm more wowed by one of the undrafted free agents we picked rather than Ryan Hayes. And it's nothing against him. It's just the fact that we have a dying need, and I don't know if that's the way I'd have gone.
Yeah, Lee, are you wowed by this pick?
I think it's very hard to be wowed by any 7th round pick. I would say if I'm an offensive lineman, the Dolphins might be one of the teams I wanted to be drafted by, because it gives me an opportunity. Because if you're willing to go in there and do what the coaches want, and you're going to have an opportunity, and they're not going to downgrade you for being a 7th round pick. If you're the best, you're going to make it onto the field. I think that is absolutely true. Mike McDaniel has said it in the past. I think he's kind of followed through with it. So yeah, I think if I was an offensive lineman, I'd be pretty happy to be a Dolphin. And I think you can see that in some of the contracts they gave out for undrafted free agents as well, where it's a bit like, look, you're going to get a chance here. It's, unless you're a left tackle, you're probably going to get a chance because Teron Armstead isn't going anywhere. But even then, Teron missed a couple of games last year. He tends to each season. You're still probably going to get a chance to run out on the field at left tackle at some point. Being a backup to Teron Armstead is actually a really important job and shouldn't be underrated.
For me, I think this is where the coaching staff are going to earn their pennies, because if he's somebody that clearly needs development with him being a 7th round pick, he's got a lot to yet learn, even though he was a 2-year starter in a unit that won consecutive Joe Moore awards, i.e. the best defensive line in college football. This is where the coaching staff are going to earn their pennies in terms of, can they help him develop into that solid player that they want him to be? So we'll see how that one pans out. But you also have to remember, whilst it's rare for a 7th round pick to crack the starting lineup, like Lee said, they do have an important role to play occasionally, as we saw with Skylar Thompson last year, who was also a 7th, I believe, wasn't he? He was a 7th the year before. I think he was, wasn't he? Or was he? He wasn't undrafted. I think he was a 7th. They definitely picked him up late.
We definitely picked him, yeah.
Yeah. So they do have an important role to play, but as we'll see his progress throughout training camp, I'm sure, given the scrutiny of the offensive line. So, okay, so they're the 4 Dolphins picks that their team made in this year's draft. We're going to talk about the schedule shortly, but just before we do, any undrafted free agents the team picked up that have caught your eye? I know they pick up a bunch every year, but any that stand out immediately to you guys? Start with you, Ian.
I would probably say the linebacker, who I'm pretty sure is Aubrey Miller, but the name has just escaped me. I think it's Aubrey Miller. Yeah, he played at a smaller college, and it was the one that was taken over by Deion Sanders when he was their head coach. Yeah, I like him. I think he's, from everything Deion Sanders has said, to then, okay, yes, so fine, he's gone on, and he's obviously going to hype up his old guy, of course he is. But the way that he said he was leading in terms of being, a unit that needed help, shall we say, and maybe someone who shouldn't have been having to lead the way that he was when he was at high school and at college and all these sorts of things. I think it's going to be a really good pickup for us because, I mean, obviously we've done reasonably well in the last few years picking up players on defense. I think it's quite a nice group to have, but I think the big thing for me is, again, the depth. I think the depth is going to be a really crucial factor. And when you've got someone like Bradley Chubb, when you've got someone like Jalen Phillips, when you've got Jerome Baker, you've got all these sort of people on the defense who are going to be very heavily involved. Because again, the run games for all these teams in the AFC has to be as supportive as, of course, does the throwing of the ball as well. These players are going to get hit. They're going to constantly be making hits. They're going to be big players for us. To have someone like him, who I think has got a really good chance of making the roster, even as an undrafted free agent, I just think he's the sort of person who could end up making 5 or 6 or 7 big tackles at points throughout the season. You go, oh, yeah, thank God for him. Thank God he was there on that day. I just really like the idea of picking him up. He's maybe a little bit smaller than you would like, but I think he can pack a punch, and I'm really looking forward to that.
Yeah, Lee, anyone stand out for you? Any others that can pack a punch, or are we scrapping the bottom of the barrel and looking for those breadcrumbs or that hidden gem?
No, I think it's the defensive players that kind of stick out to me at the moment. It's just not knowing exactly what Vic Fangio is going to do excites me. It needs so much is up in the air. Players that we think are key cogs to this defense may not be this time round. Different coaching staff, different philosophy. So I'm super excited to see how it pans out. And I'll be honest, I can't wait for the kind of training camp to roll around when we start seeing some of this stuff on the field. But I think as for now, I think I would just be throwing stuff at the wall and seeing what sticks. I'm not sure that's necessarily helpful, as I don't know a lot about these guys at the moment. But like I say, I'm still going through the film of the 4 drafted guys to start with.
Right. Okay. On to the Dolphins 2023 season opponents. So obviously we've got a 9-game home schedule this year with the extra one at Hard Rock. So as well as the AFC East teams, the Dolphins are going to play the Titans, the Broncos, the Raiders, Cowboys, Giants, and Panthers. And away from Hard Rock, in addition to the AFC East teams, they're going to play the Ravens, the Chiefs, Chargers, Eagles, and Commanders. So already, based on last season's strength of schedule, the Dolphins have got one of the hardest again this year. Are there any games for you guys that stand out to you as either being key in terms of the promotion race, or are there any matchups that you're just simply looking forward to seeing, Lee?
I mean, yeah, there's a couple of obvious ones for me on the schedule. Obviously, the Chiefs game I think is, Tyreek Hill going back to Kansas City. We all know his remarks about Tua and Patrick Mahomes when he became a Dolphin. I think that just writes itself as a great script for a nationally televised game. I also think the other one is Jalen Hurts Tua in a matchup on national TV as well when the Dolphins face the Eagles. I think that's the two former Bama quarterbacks, Tua being obviously taken higher and coming in that national championship game, but now Jalen Hurts getting the contract and going to the Super Bowl. I think that lends itself to being again a nationally televised games. I think it's probably worth noting at this stage with the way the Dolphins played last year when Tua was healthy and the additions made, be expecting a few late nights on the schedule.
Yeah, it would be nice to see the Dolphins in prime time. I have also picked up on the fact, Lee, as well as that matchup against Hurts, you've got the Panthers at home who will have Bryce Young as their starting quarterback, most likely. So that's another Alabama connection, as well as the traditional twice a season matchup with Mac Jones. So there's the Bama versus Bama quarterback matchups all over the schedule this year. So they should be good ones to watch. What about you, Ian? Any particular games stand out for you? I know obviously the schedule's not quite out yet. We're expecting it to be later in the week, but where do you see the Dolphins' main games being this year?
The thing that I've always found, especially in the last 2 years when the Dolphins have been competitive, is we've always had a run of bad games. And it's not a run of bad games where it's like, oh, the Dolphins can't do anything about it. It's just they just cannot get anything together. It's when you look at the fixture list, you go, don't like that clump, don't like that clump, don't like that clump. And I think the main thing for me, what I'd love to see in the schedule is it a bit more kind of filtered out. Maybe you have every other week or maybe every 2 weeks is a particularly tough game. But we have got one of the hardest schedules in the league this year. It is incredibly difficult. I think the one that is going to be quite big for me, I would say, is actually going to be at the Chargers. I think that when we went to LA last year, we didn't have a particularly fun time. It was was it a Thursday night game or was it a Monday night game? It was definitely a late one. It was a Thursday.
For sure.
Yeah, I have a little bit of skepticism about that trip to LA, just because I think the Dolphins are better than the Chargers. I do, and I'll stand by that. But we need to physically show it. And that's the one I really want to, unfortunately, Tua and Justin Herbert are going to be joined at the hip forever. Oh, did the Dolphins take the right one? Who was the better player? Who was this? Who was that? I want to start to put a dent in that. I really want to start to put a real motive behind it, saying that the Dolphins did make the right pick in taking Tua. They have started a rebuild and has gone really well. Obviously, it depends when in the season that comes, but that's the one I'm really looking forward to most is the Chargers, because I feel like that's a win that if we get it, that's the sort of thing that makes a real impact and shows everyone what the Dolphins are about.
I mean, I look at the schedule and think, yeah, we've got 9 games at home this year, and the Dolphins are traditionally strong at home, and none of those teams particularly scare me at home. I think traditionally the Dallas Cowboys might have the Dolphins' number, but apart from that, all the opponents they've got at home, taken away from the Bills, of course, who are probably the best team that we're going to face at home this year. None of the rest scare me. So I'm looking for the majority of the Dolphins' wins to come at home. So you then turn the attention to the away games. You think, where can the Dolphins grab an unexpected win? Because I'm sure they'd be favourites on paper against the likes of the Jets, the Patriots, the Commanders. Where can they grab that unexpected win? You've already mentioned the Chargers, Ian. Certainly, you'd think they'd play better against them this season than they did last season. But where else can they grab that win? Baltimore, that they've beaten in the past, but that was an exceptional win. That was a one-off performance in that fourth quarter by Tua and the wide receivers. Can they beat the Chiefs away? You'd think on paper probably not, but same with the Eagles. So can they grab that unexpected win on the road that lifts them into that playoff positions? Because I think it is a particularly hard schedule, but we'll see what happens there. Talking of wins, I'm going to ask each of you for your way too early season predictions in terms of the Dolphins' record this season, having looked at the schedule. Lee, I know. Shall I go to you first? Because I know you tend to predict a win for the Dolphins every week, don't you, during the season? But what sort of record do you think they're looking at this year?
I think the last two seasons, I predicted 11 wins and 12 wins. And to be honest, I think I'm going to stick in the same range. I can see 12 wins. I think the thing is, each year the schedule has got harder because the team has got better. So the schedule, do you know what I mean? It's that kind of, what's what I'm looking for? It's kind of,
it's a domino effect, essentially.
Do you know what I mean? It just keeps going, which is great. And let's be honest, like the reason our schedule is hard is part of the reason is because we're one of the teams in those matchups. Like there's not any other teams looking at the schedule going, oh great, we've got Dolphins this week, because that's not the case. The Dolphins have been too good and beat too many good teams, especially in the last year. I like to go high. Give me 14 wins. Let's go for it.
Nice. We'll take that.
Nice.
Take that right now. Ian, what do you think?
I'm just having a look through, and I think if I've counted correctly, I'm going for 12. I think, unless I've missed any. Hang on.
We'll take it.
Yeah, we'll do 12. Yeah. 1, 2, 3. No, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah, 12. 12. I'll take that. That's a playoff place. We'll take that.
Great. That's all that matters, is getting in.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm looking at the schedule, but still seeing the teams how they played last season. Obviously, teams are going to fluctuate in terms of their form and their record season to season. So you just don't really know how teams are going to perform one season to the next. So obviously, it is way too early to predict. But I've got the Dolphins at the moment 10 or 11 wins, because I think that away slant of games, Philadelphia, KC, Baltimore, Buffalo, all away from home is going to be really tricky. And if they can space them out throughout the season and not have them in a row, that'll make things a little bit easier. But for now, I'm going to be on the cautious side and go 10/11 wins. But and obviously that'll still be enough to get them in the playoffs, which we're not even going to talk about now because that's way too early. So, Okay, so go on, Lee.
I was going to say, I think the other thing, when the schedule comes out, one of the first things I'll be looking for is all those back-to-back, like getting some back-to-back home games and trying to plan a trip out to Miami where I can get 2 games in 10 days. That's the perfect trip for me. Hang on, 2 games at Hard Rock Stadium, perfect.
Yeah, and you want as many games at Hard Rock Stadium early in the season to take advantage of that weather as well. Obviously, we saw how that worked against the Bills in the opening game at home last season, where they were all pretty much gassed and the Dolphins weren't. And you'd like to see some more of that. So maybe potentially have the harder teams at home early in the season. But you'd also like to think they get a good bunch of primetime games as well, wouldn't you?
Amazingly, I think it was Stephen A. Smith was even using it as an excuse, or one of the commentators before the Miami Heat playoff game. What day are we now? Saturday night, saying that the weather's affecting the Knicks players down in Miami as well, even though
the weather is affecting the Knicks players in a sport that is played indoors at night.
That's right.
Right. Okay. I was just checking. Make sure I heard that right.
The excuse here was that it makes the arms weak. I'm just saying.
Oh, of course. Why didn't I think of that?
The other thing that struck me as well, they haven't got too many long away trips. They've got that one to LA with the Chargers, and they've got potential. And I think Kansas City looks to be the next sort of longest road trip. Do they do those back to back like they did with San Fran and LA last year. We'll wait and see, of course. But fortunately, Baltimore, Philadelphia, Washington, and the AFC East teams all appear to be relatively short East Coast trips this year, which is obviously going to cut down on the flight times. So from a good perspective, less travelling this year, it seems.
I think it'd be interesting if you do get those Kansas City and Chargers games back to back to see how they handle it this time, because obviously they went out to San Francisco, didn't play their best game by a long stretch, and then headed into LA expecting a bit of a bounce back and played incredibly flat again. Just to go back to that was actually Sunday night football. It's flexed into Sunday night. But yeah, we were expecting big things, and let's be honest, it came out and and they just came out flat again. So it'd be interesting to see if they approach it differently in regards to traveling back to Miami and then traveling back out, or what they do. So yeah, be interested to see how that's handled.
A couple of other things to mention as well. There is the potential still that the Dolphins will play in London against the Bills. We know pretty much certain that they're not going to be playing in Germany. I think those two fixtures overseas in Germany have almost been announced, if not yet confirmed. So there is the potential to still play maybe Buffalo away in London, which would be great for us, of course. But my money is still on the Raiders or the Cowboys for that matchup. And also Fan Club weekend as well. Keep an eye out for that one, usually at the end of October, beginning of November. So whichever home game is around that time, maybe that was the one that will be earmarked for Fan Club weekend as well. Okay, any final thoughts, guys, before we draw this episode to a close? Lee?
We need to do podcasts more often, but that's about it.
We do, yep. Ian, where can everyone find you on Twitter, Ian?
So on Twitter, I am the Craigo28. On YouTube, I am Craigo28. On TikTok, I am Craigo28. And on Instagram, I'm Craigo.28. So that's where you can find me doing Dolphin stuff and other silly things.
And am I right in saying that you did a blog with your first trip out to Hard Rock Stadium?
I did, yes, I did indeed.
Yeah, definitely people go and watch that, because I watched that. I think it's always great to see people's first time in Miami, because it's such a different experience, isn't it, than being over here, and even going to the London games over here. It's it's a very different experience.
I feel like the London games is quite like a consumer thing. You go in, you do your bit, and you come away. Where the trip to Miami, I will bring it down a little bit for people. I was there when we lost to the Ravens in week 1 and the Patriots in week 2 in the tanking season, in the trying not to lose games season. We got absolutely mullered. So it was fantastic to be over there. But even then, the fact that the games were so poor and that was the way the Dolphins were at that time, it was absolutely brilliant trip, and you really do feel immersed into the whole thing. And tailgating over there is one of the best things you'll ever do. It's absolutely superb.
Right, thanks, guys. So yeah, check Craig out on Twitter and YouTube, and don't forget, this is a YouTube Dol-Fan UK podcast. Hopefully it won't be too long before we're back on your normal podcast catcher of choice. But in the meantime, thanks everyone for watching, and we shall speak to you again soon.